I think we can start. Thanks everyone for joining us. Okay, if people come in, we'll just let them in as it goes. In case you missed it, it's gonna be a casual sharing. So feel free to leave your cameras off and go to the toilet whenever you want, get a snack. So I'll just be today. Okay, my name is Yun-Ping, is how everyone knows. I'm the documentation lead for Feelers, and today I'll be sharing from the workroom sharing. But just to introduce everyone, we have 𝙘𝙧𝙗𝙨, who's the project lead for Feelers, and Ashley, who's the tech and programs lead. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. So how this works is I'm just going to do a sharing and then we can do a Q&A or like chat after I finish. Yeah. So from the workroom is a new series of sharings that Feelers will start to do, where we talk about how we work together at Feelers. So for this edition of From the Workroom, I'll be sharing about our labs projects. So just some background about us for those who don't know us. We are an art and tech studio and we're housed under Potato Productions. And our work sort of focuses on, our vision, our collective vision is a supportive and self-sustaining ecosystem of artists, practitioners, and arts audiences. And we hope to initiate and nurture cross-pollination between arts and tech through projects which increase accessibility, deepen engagement, and foreground the value of the art-making process. So for the first year that we've been working on Labs, which is a pilot program, particularly supporting projects that trace unusual and innovative lines between art and tech. And for this year, we focus on performance as well as how liveness and audience experience can be remapped across digital, virtual, and physical space. So really in response to the pandemic, how can performance prevail across the distances it now has to cross? So for this year, we had about five projects, three of which I'll be talking about today, which is 100 Advertisements by Kai, Across a Small Distance by Shaw and Typhon, and Voices in the Room by 𝙘𝙧𝙗𝙨 and Shaw, Helen, Rice, and Selfing. And we have two ongoing projects which will cross over to next year: Slovenia by Ashley, as well as Interstitial Office Edition by Zafir. So these are still ongoing, they're not concluded yet, so I won't talk about them today. So I guess why process? Like why are we talking about process in the first place? I think the project for Feelers, we have focused on taking on process-driven forms as the experiment work fixed outcomes. So we place more priority on the research and development process more than perhaps material products. I think the work that we do, we like to do playtesting, experimentation. And so hence documentation becomes an important way to trace the development of each project. And also paying closer attention to how process unfolds at a slower and more organic pace. Beyond the material outcomes, I think it was also important for us to place value on the emotional, relational, immaterial, social, virtual aspects alongside the actual products that are created throughout the labs. And personally, I think I'm quite interested in creating a constellation of materials around each project and drawing out connections between the different ideas, actions, objects, and processes, and also to situate labs within a wider discourse of technology, performance, liveness, and community. In doing so, allowing different points of entry for viewers to access the works. And in examining process, we also hope to provoke reflection and allow us to build upon the experience of creating the labs, which is our pilot program, both for the artists and for the Feelers team. And also, I think archives or documentation often aspires to be comprehensive, neutral, and detached. Whereas I'm more interested in how our attempts at documentation will always be necessarily incomplete and subjective. And my aim is to draw out these aspects, presenting some glimpses into how conversations develop, how ideas shifted, and how creative decisions were made within sort of these fluctuating circumstances, like acknowledging that it didn't happen in a vacuum, and there are all these external factors that influence the process of the projects. And lastly, it also thinks of the archive as live, growing, open to intervention and interpretation, so not fixed and not really objective in the way that we might think of it as such. So the materials of each project. So actually for most of the projects, I came in towards the tail end of the project, whereas the artists were prompted or asked to do as much as they could to collect lots of materials throughout the process. And then I would come in at the end and sort of analyze and sieve through the materials. So I think I wanted to highlight the kind of materials that we gathered. So they range from anything from Zoom conversations, tests and experiments, and also like failures, cue sheets, preparation documents that led to, that were prepared alongside the show, maybe the performance, rehearsal videos, rehearsal photos and notes, Telegram chats, or WhatsApp chats, between like more casual interactions, shared references, images, and essays, because I think in some of the projects there were a lot of shared points of reference where they would share a poem that inspired them or artwork, kind of thing. So I think these all came into the web of how the projects developed, and written reflections, as well as where relevant social conversations and audience feedback. And I think we also decided, I decided to use the digital website as the main space to aggregate and present the process. So how viewers might encounter the process is through a web page alongside maintaining an internal archive, which has everything. Because I think ultimately, thinking about how this was presented, not everything was included, thinking through like what is important, what's relevant and interesting for an audience. So yeah, I'm going to start talking about 𝙖𝙗𝙗's project called 100 Advertisements Now Online. So I'm going to play you a little clip here, which is an advertisement that was played during the show as well.
Catch 𝙗𝙗's newest imaginary show, 100 Advertisements, a live performance of 100 advertisements written during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. Not to be missed, spectacular, heart-wrenching, a compelling and rich portrayal of university life during lockdown. Utterly hilarious, dark, painfully embarrassing, winner of many prizes and awards in the future, provided the future happens. 100 Advertisements, may be coming to a theater near you, maybe not.
I really like that one. So 100 Advertisements is a show that 𝙗𝙗 developed for her graduation piece, and that for Fearless Labs developed as an online performance. So at the very core of the show, it comprised of 100 advertisements that she created during the pandemic, and they range from silly and hilarious to absurd and some very sad. So for Fearless, she developed it to be conducted online over various platforms, including Zoom, YouTube, and Google Docs. And the primary mode of interaction actually was Google Docs, where participants collectively typed on the document, which 𝙗𝙗 unfolded a story and a series of instructions for the participants to enact. And the story that the narrative was, I think, for me, both really personal and humorous, commenting on the pandemic, 𝙗𝙗's experience in Germany, migration, discrimination, advertising and politics, and her dancing journey. So this show took place on the 10th and 11th of July this year. So here is a snapshot of like the process page. So I start off with the very first chat that 𝙗𝙗 and 𝙗𝙗 had in January, when 𝙗𝙗 was just talking a bit about what show she wanted to make. So this page mostly follows a chronological sort of layout, and play this here. So it sort of traces the development of the project through the different iterations, as well as the different test rehearsals, and then eventually the final 2 shows. Also like the feedback that was accumulated through the rehearsals and stuff. And also dotted throughout the page were also these audio clips of these advertisements. I think I thought it was quite fun to include it because it mirrors how in the actual online performance, the advertisements sort of interject and pace the experience of the work, and 𝙗𝙗 used it both as a background soundtrack, but also as a narrative device at key moments in the performance. So I'll play another nice one. This is also my favorite one, but it's very sad. So
stroke, brush, pat, squeeze, tickle, hug, caress,
carry, scratch, cuddle, kick, punch, slap, massage,
scrub, rub, embrace, hit, fondle, tap, clasp,
clutch, graze, press, poke.
Get daily reminders for words associated with touch, so you won't forget these words exist. Words for Touch app, the app that reminds you of touch. Download today at Google Play or Apple App Store. Words for Touch app. Because we believe we will touch again someday.
So yeah, I think that along the page, I also chose to include some snapshots of the cue sheets, not all of them, just to show a little bit about what goes behind the performance. So Kai would have these cue sheets to which she would refer to, so she wouldn't forget the order of the story, but also like instructions that she had to copy and paste in the Google Doc, and how also like various versions of the cue sheets sort of evolved over the different rehearsals, as the performance evolved. And also, I guess like to also highlight a bit, like, for every, like, even for a digital performance like Zoom, these are the underlying like documents that aren't seen, that form the structure of how the performance is performed. And then also another thing that I tested or like experimented with was using this platform or this tool called Draftback. So as I mentioned, most of the interactions happen on Google Docs. And so it was like kind of really interesting to see how the energy and interactions took place during the live performances between these complete strangers, anonymous as well, all typing on a Google Doc. So Draftback, and what you see on this screen, is a tool created by the developer James Thomas, and he initially developed it to play back any Google Documents keystrokes to quote as if it were a movie, like traveling through time to look over your own shoulder as you write. So it very cleverly uses like inbuilt Google Docs revision history, which tracks every single change by every user with timestamps accurate to the microsecond, and rebuild the history of any given document. So you can play back it, and you can see like people typing it, in real time, or actually here it's like ×3 speed or something like that. He actually developed to explore the process of how writers write, like down to every deleted word and edit. Like if you go back and you the writing process isn't always as linear and straightforward as everyone thinks it is. But I used it here to look at how collaboration happens. I mean, Google Docs is a very familiar platform to all of us because it's a use for productivity and collaboration. But I think in this performance, it became really interesting as a site of engagement. People were like, because there was a setting that everyone was anonymous. So when you appear on Google Docs, you appear as an anonymous animal, like anonymous wombat or something like that. So then you see everyone's cursors like hovering, and typing in real time. And you can type at any point, like backwards or forwards. Of course, like the story unfolds forwards and linearly, but then you have autonomy to go back and have a conversation with someone at the top of the document, or you can add things like in the middle, and you don't have to like follow the story if you didn't want to. Yeah, and as a participant, you're also free to like intervene at any point, like insert in pictures, change the font size, color. Some people created like rest zones, like when there was like lots and lots of chaos happening, people went back up and then they were like, okay, this is a rest zone, I'm going to stay here. I mean, it's kind of like people were here to see a performance, but at the same time, they were just here to have a conversation with like a bunch of strangers. And they generated different spaces in the document. And I think this is really true to what Kai wanted to do with this platform, to make it interactive without being imposing. They could participate if they wanted to, and it was just a space and for them to meet at some time and do something together, engage in this together. And turning sort of the usual use of Google Docs on its head, I think it also helped that everyone already like instinctively knew how to use Google Docs because we're so used to how it works. So yeah, like you can see here, you can see anonymous rabbit, anonymous wombat, and that everyone had this like persona to like hide behind, and that really liberated, I guess, a lot of the conversation. Like, I guess also raised questions like, what's the experience of communicating over Google Doc as opposed to like other platforms, and how can this experience of also at the same time we're on Zoom, where you can hear the audio from the ads, you can hear Kai talking, as well as a mix of pre-recorded and live videos, which you were prompted to open in your browser and watch together. So how do these elements all come together to present a meaningful experience of liveness and connection? Yeah, and I think we're also thinking about the difference between like small audiences versus like large audiences where there's a lot of chaos. You just have a lot of people like typing all at once, and people who chose to engage more or didn't engage more, and what sorts of interaction that sort of prompted. Every single performance was different. And lastly, I think after the show ended, we also had a post-mortem with Kai, where Kelly and I also chatted on Google Docs, talking about reflecting on the show and the various iterations we took. And this doc is also available on the website. I think it was interesting to highlight these reflections because we're thinking about the format, the responses from the audience, reflecting on online shows in general, and where this sort of format can go in perhaps developing it as a conversation tool or for future sort of shows. And I think also for us, how much support did the VR scene come in to support Kai, whether it was more administrative documentation or participating as test audiences, giving feedback and other sorts of input to help resolve the piece. I also thought it was interesting because actually for Kai's work, I did follow the process. So I saw a shift happen towards the end where there was a different more speculative section that was added in. There's a different sequence of stories that I thought really helped to bring it together and conclude the piece. So I think it was quite clear how the evolution of the show went. And I think this page ultimately was one of exploratory chaos to capture the kind of energy of Kai's performance. And yeah, you can go and explore this on your own on our website on the process page. Yeah, so moving on, I think the next project I wanted to talk about was Voices in the Room. So this is our other lab project with 𝙘𝙧𝙤𝙘𝙨, 𝙬𝙧𝙤𝙘𝙨, 𝙘𝙧𝙤𝙘𝙨, Rice-Tan, and something. So actually this project spanned 6 months from February to July, and also overlapped with a lot of ongoing COVID-related changes that was happening in Singapore. So in the very first proposal that Kelly developed for Voices in the Room back in February, it was conceived as a show to, quote, explore the role of language in times of crisis, when language has a tendency to feel futile or to be misused by those in power. And then Kelly goes on to write, the past year, 2020, has been a year of great grief that I don't quite know how to unpack as well. And much of my grief is situated in the sense that language has lost its potency, that our tongues are severed to each other, and that language is rife with misunderstanding. And it's quite interesting because this was a really early proposal and that changed a lot, but things still, the core of that still stayed the same. I think two other motivations that Kelly wanted to, that Kelly outlined in the proposal was that applying their knowledge about devising in the past few years as Singapore collaborators as a way to return to theatre and figure out a way of working together. And lastly, it was about pleasure, to enjoy singing, dancing, and speaking performance again. Yeah, so I mean, I thought it was nice to look at this because it was really an early proposal, and to see how these initial intentions still prevailed in the final form and took the sense of collaboration and unpacking about how language can act in times of crisis. And of course, it started off as a performance, but eventually in response to the shifting situation, it became difficult to meaningfully rehearse or perform together as a group. Hence, they made their rehearsal into a set of 5 performance scores that anyone can ask to receive, which will be sent to you as a physical set. And these scores are envisioned as a kind of open rehearsal for the collective future. You could practice the score on your own or in small groups. And it consists of a series of actions or instructions to be enacted, a bit like in between a musical score and script for a play. And they were sent via personal networks to cascade outwards, forming a community of people who have the same scores who might rehearse again together in the future. So yeah, these are still available, as far as I know, to receive. So I think this is the current iteration of the work. So I wasn't involved in Voices from the very beginning. So what I know is based on trawling through the incredibly rich and tons of volume of archival material that's given to me. The bulk of it takes the form of Telegram chats, which was the team's primary mode of communication. I received those chats that spanned 6 months to trace the conversations that took place across many rehearsals, meetings, and more informal gatherings. I think it's interesting for me to look in from the outside and try to piece together, decipher what went on, especially within the platform of Telegram, which can be extremely intimate, and also it was also their learning platform for sharing visual references, artworks, poems, and writings. Not all of it, very few of it made into final work, but it's interesting to see how they all connect to each other. Because I strongly believe that, we are the sum of our influences. We are like shaped by everything we read, watch, observe, and are eventually inspired by. And sometimes it's only in hindsight that you realize like these connections are made. Sometimes it's also unconscious or impossible to observe. So this was such a strong part of the Voices project, this cross-sharing of thoughts and influences that came together in this group, which unconsciously or consciously shaped the work. And this was important for me to draw out in the process page and to give a glimpse into the organic nature of creative process and how ideas shift and come together. And then my initial approach was like to attempt to map like everything from the start. And so I created this like mirror board and chucked everything there. And I realized like this was pretty impossible to decipher as a viewer, but I think it was really useful for me to pass the materials and make sense of it and unfold like, trace how certain things changed or evolved and what stayed the same. So for example, like the format of the work, at what point did it shift? But I realized like this was like not possible for a viewer who didn't know about the work. So for example, I also charted, I already mentioned this, but I charted the evolution of the form. So like how it became from a series of exercises to the rehearsals to a performance or a performance score, and then like the more final work, and also like the collective desires of what they wanted the work to be. So then I decided to, instead of using the board as an anchor point, I decided to anchor the page in a post-mortem conversation that took place on 30th July. So this was like conducted within the team itself, and I thought it was quite nice because in this conversation, the team reflects on the process of collaboration and how working together spanned beyond the actual work that was being produced, but became really about interpersonal dynamics, holding space, negotiating with each other, talking in the same words but meaning different things. And there's certain words that are highlighted in this conversation that you can click on as a viewer, and they open up as popovers to view further conversations and images. So this also includes like screenshots of telechats, certain pictures, documents, rehearsal notes, and also videos. And the content of these popovers are not always connected to the ongoing conversation of the word necessarily. I wanted it to become more of like an emotional link. And it's a bit more improvisational, and the process also overflowed across many months. So I wanted to bring in all this material without it being too like oh, this equals this. It's just a way of drawing all these associations through clicking on certain words. And not all of this also went into the final work, but they were quite important in the discussion. So I think ultimately the documentation for Voices in the Room mirrors its process, where conversation and organic mental connections are placed at the forefront. So for me, it's really a celebration of these organic interactions. And you can also explore this on the website. And at the very end, you can also ask for a set of scores to rehearse together in the future. And then also wanted to mention that the Voices team also developed this series of like conceptual photographs that represented each set of scores that each score that you receive. And you can see that on the Instagram page, but this is a bit of like the process, which also didn't really make it into the website, but I thought it was quite nice to show. And also, I also wanted to mention that towards the end of the process, after the scores were developed, the team also wanted to work on additional component, which isn't fully finished yet, but it's a web extension of the project where they invited people to perform the scores with a green screen, and then they are then put together on a digital site, so they look like they're in the same room performing the scores, and the viewer can interact with them as well as activate other elements on the page. And the performance were given the score to improvise without prior preparation. So this is like, I don't know, the next part of the project, which will be done soon. I think it's quite interesting because then it does extend the project into a digital space. And lastly, I want to also mention briefly to talk about Across a Small Distance, which was the third project of the labs. So Across a Small Distance is a work in progress by 𝙖𝙗𝙗𝙨 and Javon Chandra about the nature of lending, receiving, and transmission. So through a sequence of movements and activities, the work explores the textures of communication in small settings, the things too near to touch, misunderstandings too slight to notice, tiny truths too inconvenient to say. So this took place across 9th, 10th, and 11th September. And it was hosted at 𝙬, which is at Tagore Lane, and each session was followed by a post-show discussion with audience members. It had a mixture of installation elements, performance, as well as interactive visuals projected on the back wall. So I'll just play a short trailer here for those who haven't seen the show. Oops, sorry. So there were a few key elements that you see. This cloth installation that could be manipulated, the performing bodies offshore in Japan, this responsive visual projection on the back wall, as well as sound coming from radios that were positioned throughout the space. And there were 2 floors which viewers could choose to move around to view the performance. So, I mean, I think it was important to highlight that actually this wasn't what the show initially was conceptualized as. I mean, it had 3 quite distinct phases of development. And I think, yeah, the format that I chose to do this page was a series of videos that pulled out threads from the conversations that we conducted that ran throughout the 3 phases. And also, yeah, I think, which I felt were important themes or driving concerns of the process. And so I think it was, yeah, so it was important to highlight that the first, the first proposal back in January to March, I think Shaw writes about how, as a performer, shifting to the digital medium is tiring. To quote, she was fatigued of transfiguring my feelings to be sieved and squeezed through the dimensions of the lens and screen. The body becomes trivialized, secondary. Sensitivities of navigating space and time become compressed and alien in the digital realm and its language. These sentiments are not new, but the extent to which they are felt and the degree to which we continue to mismanage them have been cast with sharper relief in these pandemic times. So I think this initial proposal was a way to explore more thoughtful and sensitive ways to work across movement, dance, and tech, such that they didn't have to compromise for other forms. So yeah, this is what the format of how the page is for this project. It's a series of conversation videos, and the first one that you will encounter is on world building. And it's the first one on the page because I think it helps to outline and introduce the 3 phases. In this conversation, Shaw talks about her first proposals, about her initial desire to create an environment where a kind of jam would take place between audience, performer, and DJ, and in which interactions would be live and improvised in response to the various elements taking place. So in a way, building some element of world building taking place in this environment. But then it also briefly covers the second phase, which happened between May and June. And if you know, like in Singapore, that's when we entered the phase 2 heightened alert. So this meant that suddenly the ideas of a live performance were no longer possible, and they were prompted to move towards a digital medium. So Shaw and Javon chose to develop a collaborative board of elements that were driven by delight. So things that were both interested in and delighted by, which range from stuff like game design, cellular automata, edutainment, math games, AvroPart, movement scores, and so on. So I think it was a period of like questioning what they wanted to make together and like what was important for them. And then the third phase sort of shifted when Across a Small Distance became clearer as a physical work, when the restrictions eased and they managed to get the space that started to develop it. But however, like throughout these 3 phases, I chose to highlight world building as an underlying thread. So this particular video highlights this conversation that happens as an introduction to the foundational ideas that led to the work. And I thought this was really cute. This was like from the mirror board there from Shaw. And also like this hope that this document could be a reminder of faith and delight and a desire for kind of doing or dreaming and collaboration. So I don't want to go like super deep into these videos because you can go watch them, and they're only about like 5 to 10 minutes each, and the transcripts are there. But I think just wanted to highlight the other themes that were present. So the next video that you will encounter is on unburdening and clarifying desires. So this is connected to the previous topic, which is centered around them trying to negotiate what each other non-negotiables were, and as well as unburdening ideas of what a good artwork or a good performance should be. At the same time, being more aware of skill and quantity, and to clarify what they wanted or needed in the making of the work, so not to go beyond that. And this also segues nicely into the next video, which is on skill, simplicity, and silly things. So throughout the process, Shaw and Javon were interested in this idea of skill, but also this awareness of gaps in the work. So as not to over-rationalize every single element or over-explain. So it's about simplicity, right? And also the inclusion of like so-called silly things, which in a way is like setting the parameters and rules of their world. For example, the task of playing badminton, almost at all costs, seems really silly, but also became an important metaphor for keeping communication alive, keeping something up and flying like back and forth in the air, almost at all costs, right? So in a way, it also comments on how like even across small distances, even when you're close, disconnections and breakdowns in communication can still happen. So sort of this like dedication to these elements that were like consistent throughout the 3 phases. In the same thread, this next video talks about lightness as consciously being incorporated in the show, both in the selected elements but also in the process. And in a way, this is about the meta project of the process, in which Shaw and Javon wanted to manage their energies and skills. So it's really about keeping things light, because like it's important to respond to the fact that within the pandemic, it's more important. It was hard to resist overworking and also to pay attention to their emotional and psychological states, so that when they work on making something together, it wouldn't like completely exhaust their energy and burn them out. So in many ways, at the end of the process, they reflected that throughout the work, they tried to incorporate lightness both in the choice of elements, but also in the way that they worked. And then for me, this is another important video, which is on making differently, because I think something that surfaced in our conversations quite a lot is that as Shaw and Javon come from different backgrounds, Shaw's a dancer, Javon's an artist who works with tech as well as sound design. So I think working across disciplines meant that they made work differently as well. And in this work, they talk about how they come into making work from different perspectives and how collaboration also requires crossing certain distances, whether it's like actively communicating and translating to each other what is meaningful and instinctual as artists, and also realizing that they needed to say more and needed to explain more and go through that process of negotiation. And also recognizing that the difference in the art forms and how the paths that they each take to a common goal might be very different. Sometimes they're saying the same things, but they're using different words. And on this note, I think this is an extension of the previous video on making differently. So this is on what is obvious. This is quite a short one, but I think it's quite important for me because we talk about this one incident where it's really obvious to show that they should wear shoes while performing. And on the other hand, to Javon, it was really obvious to him that they would go barefoot while performing. And this is a really interesting instance because while their first instincts were like diametrically opposite, they had to shift some of their thinking and realize like actually what's obvious to them is not obvious to the other person. You know, as a dancer, you're like, oh, you need to wear shoes to protect your feet. But then as a non-dancer, I guess as a performer in other ways, you realize you think like, oh, barefoot, of course lah, you know. So I think on what is obvious is highlighted here. And also in the same conversation, edited together, Javon also talks about what was obvious to him in his previous projects about the question of live streaming and performance. So like for him, in a sense, it was accepted or the norm and it became like a core consideration. But for sure, like she didn't even think it was a consideration at all because her default mode as a performer and dancer is always to go to the live interaction with audience members rather than opt for the digital. And in a way, like live streaming was her blind spot. So I think it was very similar to the shoes incident. So what is really obvious to one person is really not to another. But at the end of the day, they both agreed that it's important to consider the kind of interactivity that they wanted to achieve, the degree of participation from non-audience members, and setting boundaries for the interaction. So yeah, it's about talking through that and realizing that what is obvious is really not obvious. And then lastly, the last video is on crossing distances. This I think was interesting, or was a nice way to end off because it was a specific response to a series of exercises they did when devising across small distance. So the exercises, it happened like after the second phase, after when they started to be able to go out and do things physically and work towards the final show. It started off with playing badminton and throwing paper planes at the void decks of their neighborhoods, followed by exercise 3, which is distance writing. So this is also one that was highlighted as a wall text in the actual performance. I'm just going to read it here because it's quite nice. Exercise 3, distance writing. Meet, be together for a while, then depart. Walk away from each other along the circumference of an imaginary circle to opposite sides. We did this around a body of water. At the furthest point, look towards where the other person should be. Address them with the distance in mind. So Shaw and Javon did this around Marina Bay, and in this video that you can watch, they talk about how they were trying to look at each other across the water, one with the sun in one's eyes and one with the sun behind them. And then they wrote a letter to each other. So yeah, this was quite nice. And the other exercises that they also did was one on conceptual distance, where they tried to bridge that and trying to get the other person as close as possible to an understanding of a concept that you're familiar with, for example, maths. And then the very last exercise was more experiential distance, where Shaw tried to teach everyone how to dance. So at the end of the day, these exercises spoke for me to attempts to bridge different kinds of distances, because there'll always be these distances, even with the ones who you think are closest to you, and ultimately these active attempts at communication is what makes the difference. So yeah, this page focused more on conversations around the process, though a lot was also said about creative decisions around certain elements of the performance, like why cloth, why light, why radio, and so on, sort of unfolding that for the viewer. But a lot of these also happen in the post-show dialogues. So it's a mix of like conversations I had them as well as post-show dialogues where the audience members were responding with their like initial immediate feedback. Yeah. So yeah, just to like have some kind of conclusionary statement, I think lingering thoughts about documentation. I think I was always thinking, how does this make sense to someone who hasn't seen the works? Because I think a lot of times the audiences for the shows are quite small, and then people are encountering the process page without having seen the actual works. And how can this still be an interesting engagement of unfolding a certain story? And then also how much to include and exclude, because there's really so much, and there's no way to include everything. But there's always a desire to include everything, because you're like, I want to do my best to present a sort of story that is comprehensive and accurate to show the process. But then also acknowledging that this is not possible at all, because a lot of it is just not relevant, or people don't care. They don't want to hear about all the small things, but really picking up and drawing out the key elements. Also, like, acknowledging that ultimately this decision is always a subjective one. This decision or choice of inclusion and exclusion, it's always from my viewpoint as someone who's looking at the material as a third party, and also acknowledging that through on each page there's a documentation note at the top where it's sort of like a note from me. So it's sort of saying that, okay, these are my thoughts when doing this, but this is also like my perspective. It's not meant to represent like this is the process. I think that's really important, because we're always like coming to this from subjective points of view. And then, yeah, again, to reiterate, like using documentation to reflect and improve the process, to look back in a way and just be more conscious of it, rather than like, okay, finish the work, then move on, finish the work, and then this constant cycle of making new works all the time, but really like slowing down and looking back on it without moving on so quickly. And also, I think this also talks about feelers, sort of like our ongoing dedication to placing priority and process alongside the product. So this will hopefully also continue on in like future projects as well. And about future projects, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what other work this has done. So my part's over, but I think it's quite fun, because recently we've been doing a lot of fun things, and just wanted to mention a little bit. So Build a Typhon is a digital Typhon builder developed by Ashley that uses machine learning to present a realistic looking plate of Typhons. So the concept of this project is that we really wanted to play test a fun idea and have a meaningful outcome for it. So if you're participating in this, you can generate a plate of Typhon, go to your Typhon store and try to order a plate as close as possible to the digital one. And when you share with us, we will pay for a meal on your behalf to a local nonprofit organization, Food from the Heart. So yeah, we also recently concluded our first coastal art tech workshop, which was last Saturday. It involved teaching a basic introduction to Arduino and servo motors to harness kinetic movement, and really encouraging participants to develop creative applications of tech in their own art projects. So we built a simple kinetic project using motors and lenticular prints of birds, such that the birds were like flying. And then we'll be running more of these workshops and improving them based on their feedback. And also, we've been developing some accessible art content on our YouTube and Instagram account. It's our way to like support local artists and also to nurture more mainstream art-viewing audiences. So right now we have 3 videos, which is Peaceful Process with Sin Ceramics, the local ceramicist, Painter Reviews Watercolor Paints with Mingju, and Curing My Typhon Depression, where it actually talks about how she created this Typhon machine learning builder, which is really great. And there are more fun videos in the works. And yeah, that's all from me. If you want to like join our Discord or follow us on Instagram, I think right now we'll just have a casual chat and ask any questions if you would like to. Thanks everyone. Wow, so many messages. I have to read them now.
But yes, we have some time now to take questions or chat about stuff. So feel free to raise questions via the chat, or you can unmute your mic and or turn on your video if you want. If not, and if you have other engagements, please don't feel like you have to stay. But we'll be about for a while. Yeah.
And we have some of actually the artists here as well. So we have Kai, we have Javon, we have
so you
Shaw,
can sabo them also.
Thanks for joining.
Yun Ting, you have a question in the chat, which is, what's a question you really want to be asked?
Oh no.
This is such a meta way of of asking questions. What's a question you think Yunting really wants to be asked? That's the question.
That's a hard question because I tried to like cover all the ground, but then I think I guess maybe it's like what next sort of thing, right? Because ultimately I think this was always an exploratory process for us, and I think we're trying to figure out like, oh, how can we continue this process of analyzing process in like future projects, or like, you know, is this something that is do people find interesting or relevant? And also there are many ways to review process, right? Like, of course I chose the web page because I think at the end of the day it was easier because of the trove of digital material. It made more sense to just use the digital medium. But of course there are other ways to show that, and you know, whether we do other sorts of, you know, like actually doing the video about the Typhon, like yeah, or like are there more innovative ways to present process? Yeah, that's what my question is. I mean, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think answers. Yeah, I do feel like another one of the pressing questions, as you said, is what's the value of it to the viewers? And I think also in general there isn't a lot of money available and time and space available to house this sort of work. And yeah, I don't know, I just really appreciate all the work you've done in thing. Yeah. Oh, Kai has a question, I think.
Well, it's sort of a comment as well. I also agree that it's a really big chunk of work and it's very impressive, and it's actually an art project in itself. And regarding like being useful or meaningful or something like that, I mean, I think it's rewarding to see the documentation like here today now. So I felt it was useful and meaningful. But I also wonder about like you know, people who publish manuals, like after they observe things for a long time or they have experience with starting revolutions, then they publish guidebooks on how to start revolutions, or there are guidebooks on like how to be a director, like how to run a rehearsal, stuff like that. So I just wondered whether you feel that after you observe and accompany so many projects, you would actually cultivate some kind of expertise. Like maybe you can be like a consultant or a guidebook writer or something, and your position is special because you're neutral, like you're not inside the project. Maybe you would become very good at being a facilitator or mediator or something in art projects. I don't know, I'm just like thinking like how to create a niche so that this thing can flourish, because what you're doing is unusual, like you said. And I just wonder in whether you feel like you have any desire for writing guidebooks, or if you already like from where you are now feel like there are some threads that you can pull together. Like, would you be able to give advice on projects and stuff like that? Okay, this is not really one specific question, but it's just some thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have expertise because it's only 3. That's why I feel like I'm still like trying to figure, and each project is so different. So it's really responding to the responding to the project itself. So and sort of adjusting or shifting my methodology with each project. And even now I'm still like I still feel like I'm still like not sure if this is not that there is a right way to do things, but I don't know if this is the right way, you know, like there are many ways. And I don't agree that I'm neutral, because I feel very like, I become very invested in projects and I follow the process, and then I end up being not neutral. Like I cannot fully be like objective in this process. Yeah. Whereas like, maybe if I was an like archivist or something, and I just looked at it from a very like distant point of view, then you could, even then I don't think you're fully neutral, because you have your own biases and your own sort of subjectivities when you're looking at the work. But yeah, but I think on a note of a guidebook, I think we did talk a bit about like, oh, how would we, like, how can I like write something so that Charlie can continue to do this, or like some kind of like reflection, so that if this was brought forward by someone else, or like in other projects, like what form would that take, or what things we need to be like aware of, and that kind of thing. So like, yeah, I think that could be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add also from what Kai said, that I do feel you have some expertise. It's not, you don't feel like it's fully developed, but I think it's a specific, I think you understand, or you have a certain set of principles or philosophy with which you approach the work, which might be useful for other people. So maybe we can talk about you making a prototypal guidebook, or a set of guidelines, or my philosophy of documentation by Si In Ting, which might be useful for other people. Yeah.
I'm also curious about the difference between following the project across the time, like how you did it with mine, compared to the voices in a room, where you kind of after the fact received the Telegram chats. Yeah, so it feels like, I imagine for the second case, it's really like you go there to do documentation. You make a documentation product out of the materials you get. It's like the focus is really on creating documentation to be seen by people who come to the website. But like in the case where you accompany the project, you also have a kind of dramaturgical role, because you also can give me feedback. You also can say, now I think this part is working, or that part can be changed a bit or something. And you did play those roles a little, which I think was very helpful for the project. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about this difference?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, definitely. Yeah, I think with voices, I came in on the tail end. I did participate in certain things, but I think it was more like a bit like an archaeologist, like digging and trying to like make connections. And then sometimes I think for that project, I was a bit more like a lot of questioning whether I was making assumptions about certain things, or because I wasn't involved in it, right? So then you feel like you're privy to a lot of like private conversations and that kind of thing, but then not knowing if you understood it correctly, or the way that it was meant to be understood, because you were not part of it, right? And then just being very careful about that. Yeah. Even now, like, I think that's why for that page I went with more like associative connections rather than trying to make any statements about the process, because that was how it felt to me. Yeah. But yeah, I don't really know. Don't know if I have an answer for that. Yeah. I definitely do prefer being able to follow the process, I think. Yeah, like if I could, but then a lot of the times, like sometimes you just can't, right? If they span over months. Yeah. Thank you for the comment. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the sharing. And when I did go and to browse the site, I think the pages are very impressive, because even with the condensed form and the way you have designed everything, the sea of material, like you get a glimpse of the depth and breadth of the process. And I think for a creation like a performance, it's exactly the kinds of things that are not appearing to the audience. So I think I like it a lot actually. And there's a lot to learn from, I think. I have a question about following from Kai. Anything you said you couldn't really be throughout the process with voices. So I'm like really curious, how much or did you have to like approach the team to ask, like to clarify things, you know, when you come across material and you're trying to make sense of
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely did at quite a few instances where I was just like, what is this? I don't understand what this is. But also realizing that, like, because there's so much, so some of it isn't, not everything lah. You know, I chose to pick out some things. I also went because so like in the tele group there were a lot of emotional chats, so I had this like folder which was just called emotional tele, where I just like collected all the, because I think for me that was important, where they were like just like supporting each other or like talking about all these other things which are not the project but became like quite important in the process, I feel. So like some of those were more intuitive like associations, where some I was just like, I don't understand like how this connects to this, or like why is this in, like why was this included, or like, you know. So I definitely had to talk to them a lot, or at least Kelly.
I really like the pop-ups. I mean, to me, as someone who is only able to look at the outcome or chart it as it is on the social media and whatnot, I think it did. Although I mean, there's room for me to like make sense of the post, like the discussion, and then like the other strands of the process. For me, it was fun, but I think it did, like there was some intuitive, it felt quite grounded in that sense in terms of intuition. And I think as a viewer, I think it's really a really well done job. Another question. What do you see yourself? What do you think of the term research in this case then, as an, I wouldn't say as an observer looking at the process? What was maybe like the more prominent things that you learned or discovered, rather about your own process, like your own sort of methodology, or about how each group conceive their work? Yeah.
I think in general, sorry, what do you mean by like research? So like in terms of if you're seeing my method as a research method in sort of like unpacking and you know, analyzing. Yeah. I don't know how to answer the question.
Okay, I asked this because because I've come into contact with someone who became involved in like a community-centric work as a research assistant. So her job was to also the same, like she was an active like community member. She she was roped into like the activities, and then at the end of the day, she was given the task to, I think because like by virtue of her being and sort of an outsider, so to look at all sorts of transmissions of information and communication amongst the team, amongst the community members, and then the job is to like kind of make sense of or give structure to what is happening within the community. That was why I think I see a parallel between that role and your role. So
that's super interesting. Yeah.
Because there's like a delineation between research and documentation, which I find still very ambiguous, but it's probably like a fun thing to constantly like think about for me personally.
I think I have to think about my answer a bit more, or like my response to that. Yeah, because I understand why you mentioned research, because in relation to community engagement or that kind of thing. I guess I was also, in a way, I'm still trying to figure out what my role is, or like what kind of work I'm performing, because it took a while to sort of tease that out, and even now I don't actually really know, because this is quite a new sort of structure that we started. So, but in many ways, it has a lot of parallels to the way that one might gather material through interviews or recordings and photographs, and then translate that to a community research project. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh wait, Kai, sorry, can I have one last? What's your view? Because the focus is on performance, like performative projects and that sort of thing. So do you have like what is your personal attraction towards this medium or this form as opposed to the others that you've other projects that you've been involved with? Like did that
Yeah, so I think my background tends to be more visual art, like standard stuff. But I guess the reason why Feelers Labs is focused around liveness and performance is, like I mentioned earlier, it is really in response to the pandemic. And I think also our project leads sort of like driving the project through performance. But I think it's been a really interesting process for me, because I don't have that much experience in performance. So throughout the past months, it was kind of also in a way learning about different ways that we can do it, or like I think people tend to like default or to live streaming, or like fully Zoom performances or certain ways like that. And I think there is value in that, and I do enjoy I'm mostly attending like these kind of things. But in sort of devising or creating performances, like in a way, it's about testing the limits of that also and what that can mean. So it's not just accepting it as, okay, yeah, we're just gonna do it on Zoom because that's the way to go. So it's about, I think what each project tried to do is really to test that a little bit and not just take it for granted. Yeah. I don't know if Kai has something to say.
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit of context, which is that the brief given to me in sort of running Feelers was to look at how quote unquote performance can survive the pandemic or overcome the pandemic, in the sense that suddenly everything was remote and there were so many difficulties in putting up performances. So the brief was to look at how technology could potentially mediate that gap, however you imagine what that gap is. And I think over time for me, that impulse to look at closing that gap also, I think because liveness can be very intimate, and I think in a way it also mimics physical relationships with other people in the sense of like meeting someone and actually meeting in the flesh and being able to like even like shake a hand, for example. So I do think that looking at how we can close the gap in performances is also I guess a big scale, more formal way of looking at how we can close the gap between, say, like two people, right? Like, for example, like across a small distance, that sort of framing of like how can we still have intimacy that liveness offers, not just in performance, but in life itself. Yeah. So that is kind of why I guess performance was a focus, and then also my background in performance, I guess, influenced that a lot. Yeah. I hope that helps. Yeah, and then if you don't have further notes, then maybe Kai, if you still have a question, feel free to go.
It's also not really a question, but more like a comment, because when Amanda brought up research, I felt yes, there's something about researching, like studying, devoting time, being serious. It feels a bit like a university or educational environment to hear this talk and to see your analysis of it. So for me, that's kind of researchy. But I also thought about the connection between what you do and journalism, actually, because there's this writing being done, and I think, yeah, I'm just really thrilled that you come from a visual arts background and you start doing this documentation just like this, because I also know people who started from like theater criticism, like writing reviews and whatnot, and then they experience having to write something just by seeing the product, the art product, and they move into a space where they prefer to accompany the project and to be there from beginning to end. And in dance, there is a specific role called the dance dramaturg, which is quite different from the theater dramaturg. But the dance dramaturg actually has some kind of role of like being the bridge between the project and the audience, which I think is similar to what you do. But I wouldn't apply any of these labels to you, because I still feel that you are doing something quite like on your own and quite interesting. And yeah, I'm very curious to follow more of what you do. Yes. I think Javon, I can pass the mic to Javon unless Yunting, you want to respond.
Go ahead, Javon.
Yunting, did you want to respond first?
No, I think that's a great comment.
No. Oh.
I think like dramaturgy to me is also very like new to me, because I'm not from the theatre or performance scene. So, but I know people who are dramaturgs, and I'm always like, I don't really know what you do, but I can something like this. So yeah, it's really interesting for me. I wonder whether there could be like a visual arts version of this, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I have a part comment and part question, and I think part of the comment / question is related to what Kai shared also, because I think listening to you today, it seemed to me that you did a lot more than just documenting or archiving, right? Which I suppose, as I understand it to be, there can be different parts of this process. I think the first part could be like some kind of scavenging, like often, right? Like you're just going around and seeing, kind of like what traces of the projects there are, or like what traces of the process there are, right? So I think first there's like an impulse to scavenge, and then or like to just like dig up stuff, material, and then I think secondly, normally there's some kind of organizing of the different, again, materials into like different groups lah. Like Telegram chat is one kind, and just looking up at all the materials that you have uncovered and seeing how you can group them and organize them together. But it seems to me that in your presentation you did like a third thing, which is also to kind of tie all of them into like kind of narrative, which is to say, I think you kind of made sense also of all the items that you uncovered, and you kind of like package them in a story almost. yeah. I think what 𝙖𝙗𝙗 is saying, there's this element of weaving all of the different things that you have found and uncovered into a story and then telling it back again, to not just, I guess, the general public, but also the creators, right? And the artists of all these different works. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that was just something that I realized, that it's more than just a labor of finding things and organizing things, but also piecing things together, which to me seemed to go beyond what I normally understand documenting or certainly archiving to be. And yeah, I think earlier on when Kai mentioned journalism, in relation to the earlier comment about research also, I don't know, I thought of this online website called The Conversation. Maybe some of you know about it. It's just a website that kind of converts, not converts, but rather like translates academic studies into essentially like pieces that you can read, right? And the tagline of theconversation.com is academic rigor, journalistic flair. So I kind of feel like that was something that you did as well, right? Like you really identified a lot of these very, very loose items that was made in the process of creation. And after that, having tied all of them together into some kind of very digestible narrative or like logic, it makes the whole thing much easier for everyone to understand and digest. Okay, and all of that is still just, I guess, the comment part. But if I do have the question, I am curious to know when the impulse to kind of also weave a narrative out of all the things that you found came up. Was that something that you initially set out to do from the beginning when you got this role, or was it something that you felt like you had to do or wanted to do? In the process of.
Thanks for that. Yeah. I think it was in a way sort of embedded in the role. I think there was some level of presentation involved in the documentation. Like it wasn't just like I was fully archiving and there was completely internal. I think there was some sort of requirement, I don't want to say requirement, but desire for viewers to make this process kind of public. So like what form that would take was kind of up to me. So I think but then of course like deciding to do it on a web page and everything like that was sort of after that. So but I think it's important to, in a way, I think we can't just stop at the second step, like to some extent, or like I can't just stop at the second step, because then I guess in a way, who is it for, right? Who is this process for? Like who are we showing it to? And then that involves a level of sieving and kind of almost. Okay, so I'm a curator. So for me, I guess the impulse is a curatorial impulse, right? To weave a narrative, but also in a way give care to each part of the process to present it almost like in a way I might create an exhibition maybe, but on a web page. I don't know if that's very accurate, but I think that's what I default to. So that was the form it took. Whereas maybe someone else might have taken a different approach to the presentation part. Maybe they might have done like a piece of writing or like a podcast or like, I don't know, like some other sort of format. So yeah, hope that answers the question. Thanks so much, everyone. I think, we're out of time. So thanks for joining us. Creative presence. Yeah, that's really nice. I think it's less bogged down by labels like dramaturg or critic. Okay, cool. So thank you again. Feel free to drop out and we'll see you around. Please follow Feelers because they will continue to do good things. Labs, there's still 2 more projects in the labs which will be presented.
Yeah, just a note that Yunting is leaving Feelers after this, so please follow Yunting also. And you will see more Yunting soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.